Welcome to the Orthtrag series Moose scripting videos. My name is Mike. I go by the nickname of Pikes on Discord, and I help out with maintaining the Moose scripting engine. I'll now introduce the new ops classes that Funky Frankie has implemented over the last few years. These ops classes allow scripters to generate AI taskings for both single groups and entire battlefields alike. This presentation follows the presentations on DCS tasking in Orthtrag. Be aware each presentation includes a building block of knowledge, and there can be terms explained from previous videos. This video is an introduction to the ops hierarchical classes that are used with Orthtrags. Ops groups are a term that identifies the names of the objects we can assign Orthtrags to. The first thing that is apparent is that there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy allows orders to be executed by any appropriate subordinate structure. More on that later. There are three levels of collective names for these layers. These collective names are Ops Group, Cohort, and Legion, and these are largely for internal use, even though they are visible in the documentation. Explaining that here first will save confusion later. In the last slide, I'll go through the air groups as an example. Using the air ops groups as an example, we can explain exactly what they do and what makes them up, and this should make the land and the sea ops groups easy enough to understand. This is a slide provided by Frank, the creator of the next generation of Moose. The main things to notice are Orthtrags on the left in blue can be issued to the ops group level, which is the lowest level and equivalent to a single group in DCS. These can also be issued to the Legion level, the commander level, and the chief. And we see that under the commanders, the Air Force, Army and Navy each have their own branches. We see that the cohort level is a structural format level for squadrons, platoons and flotillas, but it doesn't itself allow an Orthtrag order to be received. This slide reinforces the collective names for Ops Group, Cohort and Legion. These are only for internal usage by the commander and the chief. The reason for their existence is that these levels are the same entity when the commander or chief uses them. A single Orthtrag can be executed by the Air Force, the Army or the Navy, and thus internally the code has to be able to refer to the level rather than the exact branch of fleet, air or arm. These do not need to be referenced directly at all by the consumers of Moose. It's merely for your reference when you see them in the documentation and you wonder why they exist. So let's get slightly more specific. This slide explains what the specific air class does. I'm going to use the air class as an example. Here is the original map of the classes. In this example, I will use the air groups and explain the levels of flight group, squadron, air wing, commander, and chief. Firstly, the flight group size is in size equivalent of a DCS group. You must declare it only if you wish to use an Orthtrag without any of the higher level structure. So you don't need all of this, but the very basics of flight group you will do if you're using it on its own. The squadron is a declaration of a single type of plane. How many there are, what missions they can accomplish, what payloads they can use, and a reference to the template plane in the mission editor. So these don't do anything except they describe the plane's literal squadron and its role. The air wing is a warehouse. When a new air wing is made, it declares a warehouse static unit in the mission editor and it checks for a connection to its nearest air base. In the case of ships, these are their own warehouses. The air wing cannot be more than a single air base. Behind the scenes, it is a savable list of assets in Lua tables. The commander class is a single entity. There may be possibilities to have two, certainly in different coalitions. In the cases of air groups, the commander can take as many air wings as are made and then attached. The commander does nothing by himself. Its single purpose is to accept an Orthtrag provided and then work out which air wing and thus which squadron should execute the order. The beauty of the hierarchical system now becomes apparent because the built-in intelligence of the commander can use the following information to have the off-track executed: the location geographically of the air wing, the numbers remaining in the squadron, the mission roles that the squadron is capable of, the mission distance, and the planes can actually fly. This is the beginning of the way the AI can achieve goals. Finally, the Chief class is a heavily in development class that goes the final step. Firstly, the Chief inherits the commander and all their assets. This enables them to take an off-track like the commander. In this way, it's identical to the commander. However, the Chief is an AI that will use the simulation's natural detection network and the Intel class to create its own off-tracks. The way in which these are created is dependent on its aggression level, what it can see, what assets it has in its disposal, and some basic borders. Chief can use Intel, or we can provide two more informations to it. One of them is the op zone, which is used to calculate the ownership of an area on the battlefield. And the second are targets. Target is a class that, rather than requiring an off-track order, we're simply saying that this item is a target the Chief needs to consider. Targets come with priorities. Targets, whilst including the usual group and unit, also include statics, air bases, and sets of units and groups, and this allows the Chief to be more smart about the allocation of resources when assigning his off-tracks. That's the overview done of Ops Group's hierarchy. In the next videos, we'll look more deeply at the code and the actual use of each of these ops groups from the bottom up, beginning with the flight group or ops groups.